fall right back to you. I think, could it be different this time? Setting expectations as if I did not learn anything from my first time. Oh, you try to change my mind. I know the truth you feel inside. I will fight until you're mine, 'cause I've been rude, so come inside. If I had just one piece of your heart, I could show you why you need my love. Now and forever, baby, I'll give you my heart. What can I do to make you mine? Heart's on fire. Heart's on fire. Heart's on fire. Heart's on fire. Every time I fall right back to you, I think it could be different this time. Setting expectations as if I did not learn anything from my mistakes. Over and over my heart breaks. Why do I look for love in all the wrong places? Why do I look for love in all the wrong places? Why do I look for love in all the wrong places? If I had just one piece of your heart, I could show you why you need my love. Now and forever, baby, I'll give you my heart. What can I do to make you mine? Heart's on fire. Solo si supiera. Heart's on fire. Cuando yo lo amo. Heart's on fire. Solo si supiera. Heart's on fire. Cuando yo lo amo. Fire, fire. Heart's on fire. Solo si supiera. Heart's on fire. Cuando yo lo amo. Heart's on fire. Solo si supiera. Heart's on fire. Cuando yo lo amo. Fire, fire. Heart's on fire. If I had just one piece of your heart, I could show you why you need my love. Now and forever, baby, I'll give you my heart. What can I do to make you mine? Heart's on fire. Heart's on fire.
What do you see, you people gazing at me? You see a doll on a music box that's wound by a key. How can you tell I'm under a spell? I'm waiting for love's first kiss. You cannot see how much I long to be free, turning around on a music box that's wound by a key. Yearning, yearning, while I'm turning around and around. Truly scrumptious, you're truly, truly scrumptious. Scrumptious as a cherry peach parfait. When you're near me, it's so delicious. Honest, truly, you're the answer to my wish is truly scrumptious, although it might seem presumptuous. Never, ever, ever go away. My heart beats so unruly because I love you truly, honest, truly I do.
What do you see?
Scrumptious, you're truly scrumptious, scrumptious as a breeze across that way. Oh, when you're near me, it's so delicious. Waiting for this, truly, you're the answer to our wishes. You cannot be scrumptious. How much I long to might seem presumptuous. Never, ever, ever go away. Yeah, my heart beats so unruly because I love you truly, truly I do.
Turning around,
Truly I do. Truly I turning around and around.
What a good day. What a wonderful thing you're doing here.
We need to find more formats like you're doing now to keep this going now, and also when we get back.
Everything in those comments is so empowering, so supportive, so beautiful, and that is what we do in the room every month.
This was not 100% what I expected, which is good.
People will really, really need it.
It's really important to us to use Singular Sensation, yes, as a safe gathering place, but also as a place to amplify and support and offer a safe space too.
How'd you get so good at this?
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Canadian Green Alliance's inaugural Green Panel. We are so excited to bring you these conversations in conjunction with our amazing partners. Our series partner is TAPA, the Toronto Alliance for Performing Arts, and our amazing producing partners is Singular Sensation. My name is Julia McLellan, and I'm one half of the co-founding team of the Canadian Green Alliance. For those of you who are new to the Canadian Green Alliance and you don't know anything about us, hi, welcome. Thank you for being here and tuning into this broadcast. We are a not-for-profit organization that is devoted to bridging the gap between sustainability and theater. We're super passionate about being the living room where people can draw up a chair and join the conversation about the intersection between arts and climate. We're also really passionate about producing resources for arts organizations and arts individuals so that they can produce theater with people and planet as a priority and not an afterthought. The CGA would like to humbly acknowledge that we personally live and work on the traditional territory of many great First Nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. The CGA also honors, invests in, and continues to learn about the Dish with One Spoon principle. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share and protect the land. Subsequent First Nations and peoples, Europeans, and newcomers alike have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. One of the key foundations of the Dish with One Spoon is that anybody who uses the land should not abuse the land, and that collectively we have a responsibility to ensure that there's a sustainable and healthy environment for generations to come. I know myself, everyone at the CGA, and everyone you're about to see on this panel tonight really feel that to their core. With that in mind, I'm very excited to introduce the wonderful folks that you're going to see sitting here with me tonight. The Green Panel series is all about taking big, scary, confusing, inaccessible conversations and questions about the intersection between arts and climate, sitting people down and talking it out so that we might go forward together with a commons of wisdom and knowledge and brainstorms and ideas. Long story short, we can do it together if we start talking about it in a really open way. So without further ado, I would love to introduce the wonderful humans who are going to be here with me tonight. Oh, and also I should mention in the chat there on your YouTube or wherever you're accessing this broadcast, please write in your questions. If you hear something tonight that sparks an idea, confuses you, you want more enlightenment on, type it into the comment section and we'll get to it at the end. So without further ado, here are our panelists. Welcome everyone. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So as I call out your name, please introduce yourself, tell us where you're calling in from, and why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into sustainability and how you ended up on this panel with us here today. I'm going to start with Alexandra.
Hi, I'm calling in from Toronto, or Tikaronto, which means where the trees meet the water. And I'm so thrilled to be here today because I would say that sustainability and art have been the two foundations of my passion for quite some time. I grew up in a rural community where we raised all of our own food. And from that time in my life, I've just been passionate about living close to the land and enjoying good food and good times with people. As an artist, a lot of my work has happened in cities. I studied in Montreal and the bilingual program for costume and set design at the National Theatre School, and engaged a lot with the community there through eco-responsibility, as they like to call it in Montreal, and art. And I brought that with me to Toronto, founding a collective of sustainable designers called Triga Creative. And we are working in theater, live events, and also expanding most recently into film.
Oh, nice.
Yay. Oh, so inspiring. That's incredible. Aisha, take it away.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Aisha Lesley Bentham. I am a vegan chef, an artist scholar, and a wellness coach. My business is called Choosing Hue, formerly known as Hue Foods, where I was cooking and preparing meals for clients. And now I've kind of moved away from that and have been focusing a lot more on education, inspiration, and motivation, a lot more talking and speaking, which is great because that's my background. I studied acting. And so my move to sustainability is something that was very much the foundation of my meal prepping company when I had it. I only worked with glass containers. It was kind of this ongoing system of like, okay, here's some, give me back some, that kind of like share and exchange. And so even though at that point for me, it was very interesting when starting the business and wanting that type of practice and how challenging it was to kind of like really kind of get people into that space. But since then, I've just been really looking at sustainability and asking questions around it in terms of like self-care, how do we take care of ourselves and the planet and each other. So this is where I am now.
Amazing. Yeah. Oh my goodness, you all. Kevin, take it away.
Great, thanks, Julia. Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin Matthew Wong. I use he, him pronouns. Usually when I introduce myself, I have to say that I want to take you back 2,000 years, but I'll try to do it in 30 seconds. And the reason for that is because around 200 BC, there was a group of people in the country that's now called China that began a series of migrations. And they started in the north, and then they started to migrate south. They were pushed by the forces of economic and political turmoil, of violence and insecurity. And over those 2,000 years, they migrated first south and then across the world. And one of those migrations was to Turtle Island. One of those families came to Toronto, where the trees meet the water. And one of those family members is here to join you on this panel tonight. They're very excited to do so. And those people were called the Hakka. In Chinese, those characters translate to guest family. And I take that identity really as a foundational part of how I carry myself in the world, and especially in the context of this country, thinking about what it means to be a guest here. And I think not only what it means to be a guest, but to interrogate what it means to be a good guest. And I think that's where I'd like to start in terms of thinking about my relationship to this idea of sustainability. And I think as a storyteller, as a producer and theater creator, a big realization that I had was that it's Indigenous storytelling that has made this place somewhere that was safe, somewhere that is livable for my family to come to. And it's our duty to continue that in the same way that Indigenous communities have been thinking 7 generations in the future since time immemorial. So my work is really focused around a specific company called Broadleaf Theater. We're a tiny, gritty company. We try to make work that merges climate justice and theater performance, and we try to make friends anywhere we can. And,
it's amazing. I can definitely attest to you making friends wherever you go.
Yes, same.
Amazing quality you have. Amazing. And Harveen, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone. I'm Harveen Sandhu. I am speaking to you all from the unceded ancestral territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, also known as Ottawa. And listening to you speak, Kevin, it's so interesting. I'm reflecting now. I've been a guest everywhere I've been my whole life. So I'm Punjabi, but I was born in East Africa. So I was a settler there, and I'm a settler here. So that's, it's so interesting. I am an actor, and more recently a forest school educator and a educator with a nonprofit in Canada called Genvironment. And it's a wonderful nonprofit for youth. And essentially we focus on giving kids an opportunity to make change, environmental change, social justice change in their communities. So it's, and it's a young nonprofit. We're just getting started. So it's super exciting. And my relationship to sustainability is an evolving one. It's been a beautiful process of the last few years of really truly just exploring my relationship to land and to nature. And a lot of it has come through me through yoga and through my exploration of Ayurveda, which is sister science to yoga. And it's all grounded in the elements. It's all grounded in Mother Earth and reciprocal relationships. So that has been my the genesis of my love for this work. And I'm also, I should say, the director of education for the Canadian Green Alliance, which is super, super fun. And looking forward to that journey.
Awesome.
Oh my goodness, the brains on the Zoom call, like myself, very excluded. I'm just like, you all are amazing. I am so just beyond beaming and excited to have you 4 here, because I personally know and collaborate with all of you through the CGA in some way. And the amount that you 4 bring to the table in terms of resources, advancements, innovations, but more so than that, mindfulness and thoughtfulness and a real connection down to the root reasons why we should be doing these things is so inspiring. And I just want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To start off, we have tasked ourselves with this hilariously large and broad and impossible to answer in 90-minute question. Green theater, what the heck is it? I think in order to head towards, sectioning that up and starting to talk about some of the intersections there, I think we need to reverse and ask ourselves a really important question that sits outside of that a little bit. And that is, why do we think arts workers are ideal candidates to be talking about the climate in the first place, or the land? And I'm just going to start with Harveen, and then maybe we can self-facilitate through there if you have any ideas.
It's a great question. It's something I've been experiencing in myself. I've always believed this, and it's never been more evident than it is now with the crises that we've been experiencing the last couple of years. I think the inherent nature of what artists do it's interesting, it's twofold. It's to look inward, but at the same time, we're the ones who sit on the outside of society looking at society from a larger perspective. So the work of reflection, of empathy building, compassion, what we do is inherently, in a way, activism. when we give a voice to people or to communities or to tell stories from the past, that is a form of activism. I really see that connection very clearly. So, I think, and then the other part of it is, as artists, we're constantly putting ourselves in the light and in the limelight of people's attention. And as soon as you get people's attention, undivided attention for any amount of time, you are essentially in a position to have influence. You can see it with people like Leonardo DiCaprio and Harrison Ford and Jane Fonda. The kind of stuff they're doing for the environment is just, they're working on a different level because they have a different level of influence. But even for us, the Stratford Festival alone, 500,000 patrons a year. That's a ton of influence and a ton of dialogue that can happen there. And artists are brave people who seek dialogue out, they seek debate out, and they embrace complexity. And this is complex work. It's not clear. It's not a clear path. So I think we're poised in a very unique place to have these conversations and to have this concern for something that is bigger than us. Because when we're creating theater, we're all working together to create something that's bigger than us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Anyone else want to weigh in? Just raise your hand if you want to speak.
I'll speak.
Go ahead, Alex.
I agree fully with everything you just said, Harveen. And I think that one of the things I love most about what I do as a theater artist and what I'm discovering working in film as well is that these are mediums where you can imagine alternative ways of being through what you're creating. And I think that that's the primary practice that we need to instill in everybody right now to make lasting change for a climate positive future. And the biggest thing holding us back is our imagination collectively, and practicing that is our art. So I think it is an essential work to do right now as artists, is to encourage that imagination.
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin. I'll jump in after.
Okay, I'll try to be quick.
Yeah.
On that point of imagination, I think on the idea of arts workers, it's also incumbent upon arts workers to expand our imagination of what we do. I think in the expansion of our role as active participants in this climate struggle. And I'm coming today with a producer brain, so trying to break down little parts of everything. But I think, arts workers, we also have access to set structures that we can be free within if we really try, the same way that when we collaborate with artists, they're setting creative restrictions to be free within. Arts workers too know their institutions and know how they can put, where they can move things. And we have a built-in network on this call, across cities, but across the country and internationally. And I think that's a really powerful kind of untapped network of passionate folks everywhere. And I think to tap into that is really important. Just to echo as well, the credibility and the influence and acknowledge that, to notice it and to understand that that's a responsibility that we also hold.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mass. I think it's as I'm recognizing as, through my business and through being online quite actively, and just knowing that that I have a responsibility as not only as an artist and as a scholar, but as a human being
yes.
to really be a lot more, even in my uncertainty, be a lot more vocal about things that work and don't work, I think I love what you said, Alex, about, creativity. I just finished writing a paper about that, just talking about utopia and this concept of utopia and creativity and just kind of looking at how we really need to tap back into our imagination as much as possible. Our ideas of space and spatiality has changed massively, especially because we are we're not stuck at home, but we stuck at home, So it's what is the spaces in which we create now? What are the spaces in which we imagine? What does that now look like? because we no longer are leaving our houses as often to like go to the studio or to go to the theater or to go to the museum. So like, how and where are we creating? Where is our creativity coming from? And so I've been very invested in this idea of spatiality, especially now, and how that relates to the environment and and I think that is the direct connection to the environment, is like looking for what is around us and really connecting with that. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, such beautiful answers. One thing that I just want to kind of go back and ask you all to expand upon, and it sort of leads us into my next thought, is Harveen mentioned that we often see our industry as an empathetic one that we have the ability as arts workers and creatives to really link into what people need and what people feel and be able to service that or give some relief to that, or at least have a knowledge of what other people are going through. Mm-hmm. So my question is, when we're heading into this conversation, the five of us have all had many conversations about these intersections, but I don't want to jump ahead in case there are some people out there watching and saying, what's wrong with the industry? Like, why do we need to be having these conversations? Like, what did we do so wrong? Yeah. So I think when we do self-identify as an industry that does have their, finger on the pulse of a lot of other people's needs and emotions, it's intriguing to me and to the CGA as a whole that sometimes when the environment comes into play, we often largely as an industry stop having that empathy.
Yeah, 100%.
In response to our creative needs. Yeah. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, where are we, failing is a very negative word, but where are we coming up short in terms of our empathy for land and the environment and our responsibility to it? Mm-hmm. Anyone can jump in.
Mm-hmm. I can get us started. I mean, because I've had these conversations with people recently, where I talk about there's this budding organization called the CGA, and we're doing this, we're bridging the gap between theater and sustainability. And it's interesting, I'll be honest with you, there have been some underwhelming responses of like, oh, but what's wrong? And I think what it's maybe at the core of that is that, and the reality in a way, is that theater is already sort of a fringe thing. Like we're the little guy. We are the little guy. Yeah. So when we talk about climate, we're talking about, Shell and like petrol and corporations and Amazon and Google, right? We're talking about the big corporations that are, digging us all into a massive hole. But the reality is this: we're now at a point, and I really believe this, we're now at a point, I mean, we were at this point a long time ago, but we're definitely now at a point where no industry and no sector and really no human in any way can afford to sit this one out and go, oh, this doesn't really concern me, or I don't have what it takes to contribute, or I don't know enough. Like no one's actually able to say that anymore. This whole thing of climate change and the havoc and the devastation that we're wreaking on the planet is reaching every single living thing. And it's reaching the peaks of the mountain. I mean, there's plastic on top of Everest. Like, how did that happen? Indigenous communities in the deep Amazon are being affected by this. Everyone has a potential for impact. So the question is more, who really can afford to sit out? And the theater industry is no less. Again, I come back to what I said earlier. The Stratford Festival alone is attracting 500,000 people a year. That's scale. That is huge scale. And in fact, on CBC, a couple of days ago, Anthony Cimolino was being interviewed by Heather Hiscox and talking about his plans for the summer. From Anthony Cimolino is the artistic director of Stratford. And he was saying, this was shocking to me, that after the airline industry, which was the biggest industry that got the biggest hit from COVID, it was the entertainment industry that got hit the most in Canada. Mm-hmm. And theater falls into that. So like we take up space, and our work, we produce garbage. We produce toxins. Like we have an impact on the planet. So we have a responsibility then to look at that.
Mm. Yeah. I think too, like so I just came back from Guyana. So Guyana is where my parents are from, South America. up at the top. And, you know, I'm very aware of my relationship to, I'm gonna come back to space again, my relationship to the environment versus when I was in Guyana. So I was in a part in Linden where you could just, like, everybody's talking about the environment, the space that they're living in, and how things are just like, the garbage is everywhere, there's potholes, there's this, there's that, it's like within everybody's conversations.
Right.
And it's almost like it's impossible to not talk about it. Right. And I think about here, I live in Ajax. I didn't say that before, but I'm in Ajax, and like everything just like, you don't see it in the way that I saw it in Guyana. So I'm really wondering, you know, the way that people are interacting with certain issues environmentally, it's because maybe they're just like really not seeing it. They're really, really not like really seeing it. I mean, it's there. We all know it's there, but like, so the ways that they're not engaging with these dialogues, because they're like, what are you talking about? I don't see anything.
It's not immediate for them. The consequence is not immediate.
Right. You know, garbage gets picked up every week.
Yeah.
You know, the streets get cleaned. You know, so you're not really engaging with it in a particular way, the way that I saw in Guyana. And I was like, it was shocking to me. Like, I was like, this is an issue. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, how do we fix this? And way bigger. I'm like, who am I to come in from Canada being like, that's not my job. But like, you know, like, just, I was just very aware of how different it is here.
Yeah.
How different it is here. And it's like, how do we bring that to the forefront to really let people know that the little thing that you did, you may have just thrown that gum wrapper on the street, but like literally 10 steps away is a garbage. Like, what is that like disconnect? You know? So yeah.
Kevin, go.
I appreciate it a lot, Aisha. Just the recognizing what's in your backyard. And we do have a backyard. We all have, like, I'm in a building in Toronto. I don't have a backyard. So, like, we all have a metaphorical backyard. And it's important, and we're so disconnected from that.
Yeah.
And you know, if our job is to tell stories and to be in relationship to land, then we can tell those stories too. It doesn't just have to be, you know, the Canadian place from the 80s, you know? And I think like one problems, if we go with the question prompt, that a few that I felt, like with the works that are environmental, sometimes there's like a feeling of like drive-by journalism, or like, you know, we'll have one show in the season, check, you know, and that show is actually a love story. Like, you know, the background, the set dressing is climate, but it's a love story, you know, which is fine. Let's tell those stories. But it's just something that I think needs interrogating, and we can all do a better job of audience dramaturgy when we're engaging with our arts institutions. And also just as audience members, even if you think, okay, I don't have an in on this company, you have a voice as an audience member to say, well, I really enjoyed this show, which felt accurate, and I didn't really enjoy the way that this show potentially. You know, and then just one other thing is, all of the other problems that we're all aware of are also baked into in the theater. It's so hard, you know, and all those problems. I often think of like the climate problem as just this tangled knot of like, okay, we've got all the things in there. We've got the patriarchy, we've got racism, you know, we've got capitalism, and it is our job to try to untangle those knots, like as large as they are, if we believe in a larger sense of justice, you know. And it's our job to be creative about where we sit in that larger puzzle of social change. So problems and opportunities, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think that like we've all touched on the platform and the potential for like habit forming content that could be beneficial to a collective climate positive change. So I think that there's like this reach for audience, and like making the audience aware that the backyard is shared, and when you throw your garbage, it's going, if you don't see it in your backyard, it's in someone else's backyard. So like, how do we use theater to do the like fundamental act of theater, which is putting yourself in another situation or another person's shoes, to make things feel closer to home? So there's this, one of my mentors, Ian Garrett, he talks about how do you measure success in sustainability. And he always talks about how it's never in one way. It's always in interconnected ways. So you can measure the success of sustainable practices in theater just by making content that changes people's minds and allows them to imagine a different way to act when they go home and they leave the show. And that might offset the carbon footprint of how much they expanded in coming to the show and driving there versus taking public transit. It's really hard to measure like what the impact is beyond the experience of coming to the theater. And he always gives the example that one of the biggest environmental impacts of theater is transportation. It's one of the biggest impacts for a lot of our activities as people these days. But it could also be way less impact than if all those people were sitting at home with all their lights on and all their devices and appliances going at the same time. The facility in which they are experiencing theater is probably creating less carbon output than them all being at home alone, plugged in. So like there's so many ways to measure success in sustainability, and like the awareness of all those dynamics I think is key as arts workers who are trying to create conversations about sustainability with our audiences and with each other. And I think that like we can also be aware that we interact with a lot of the industries that have higher impacts than us through the work we do. So the fashion industry, like as a costume designer, I'm directly engaging with that industry every show I work on. And the decisions I make as an artist within my industry have like all these other impacts. Food industry, as theater goers, we're engaging with food and production and all of this. So I think, like you said, it's unraveling all of the pieces that make this issue, but it's also like seeing that they're interconnected in ways that we might not always be able to see on paper. Like there's this impact that's so hard to measure of like how people's minds might be changed by coming to a show.
So that's so true. Well, you know what? We're here. We're talking about green theater. What the heck is it? Let's try to unravel it just a tiny bit. Like there seems to be a current of what we're talking about so often. And what's really interesting to my co-founder, Tess Bender, and I, when we take a lot of meetings with people who are in leadership roles in these organizations that we're trying to court into this kind of solutionary programming, is that they talk about like, look, we're really time poor. We don't have so much time to be able to like, you know, on the first day, when are we ever gonna get to that table read? Like we've got so much to talk about. And one of the things we're always trying to sort of like invest into the conversation is that these things are all inextricably linked. Like the system of extraction that is causing, you know, incredible harm to our BIPOC communities is very much linked to the climate crisis and to the patriarchy and to capitalism. So instead of thinking of it as like these check marks that have to happen on day one of a show, how can we actually try to broaden our knowledge and understand how they actually are linked and work together in a system of extraction that's not healthy for anything, planet or people? So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on like how we might go forward unraveling that. Just an easy question.
That's a big one. I mean, this is a bit philosophical, but the reality is the person who says I'm time poor or I just can't probably doesn't have a relationship to the planet, and I really mean that. It starts with relationship. If there's anything we can take away from Indigenous communities the world over, it's that they have relationship, and they understand in their bones what it costs them to not care. So I think, you know, in terms of when we're looking at the big players like heads of companies, for example, I think a lot of it is the lack of willingness. And when we started this conversation by saying, you know, creativity. We need to be creative again. But also, the beautiful thing about this whole movement of turning the theater green is that it's not something you do in a closed boardroom. It requires dialogue and engagement with the community. So you have a million allies. And you have to seek out that collaboration. Don't think you can do this alone. So it's about actually, dropping the whole construct of the hierarchy and opening the doors and let that community flood in and go, how do we do this? How can we collaborate? So that it's not overwhelming and it's not this big thing, but it's about changing the culture from within, starting with literally every staff member and like having field trips, making it so that people can connect first and discover what is my personal human responsibility to this. As soon as you get people on board in an emotional way, then the work just happens. But if it becomes a checklist, it's more red tape. It's another bureaucratic thing to get done. Yeah. So without relationship, we're just doing admin. It's just administration. It's more administration. Is what I would say.
I like what you said. This relationship, that person may not have a relationship with the planet, with the environment. Sorry. Which I find to be, I agree and I disagree, right? Because I mean, whether we acknowledge it, we're constantly in relation, right, with the environment. But I really do feel like it's kind of like I'll use this analogy, like we're kind of all like young teenagers, and like we're like, well, my mom will clean up. We'll clean it up.
Yeah, well, that's
right. Like I don't have to worry about it. Like my mom will clean it up, and I feel like our relationship with the planet, with the environment, is so immature. Like it's like we kind of got stuck in our adolescence.
Yeah,
and so now we're in this space as we're adults. We're like, well, I don't have time for this. Like, our ideas of how to keep our family safe and how to protect our families. Like, I got to go to work. I got bills to pay. I got to pay my insurance. We kind of just have completely lost this whole idea about like what it actually means to take care, right? Because I'm like, when we were children, I mean, our relationship to the environment was so, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, my relationship to the environment was incredible. I spent hours and hours outside doing things on the ground and feeling and touching. And it's like, it stopped at a certain age.
Yeah.
And so I'm now curious, like, how do we then, how do we reconnect us? How do we move from our immature stage into our adult stage with the environment, which I think is like, I don't know how to do that, but I don't know how to do that. Yeah, maybe we'll figure it out. But that's, I think, where I think a lot of people are. They're very just immature.
Yeah. Especially when the irony is that the parents we're asking to clean up for us are our children and grandchildren, which is just ironic and strange.
Yeah, the metaphor continues.
Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I'm like, I don't know. I'm coming up with this contrary thought, and I just like need to say it.
Bring it.
Like, I know that there's this piece of responsibility in the work we're talking about, but I also think there's like an integral part of play. And like, I think like that's maybe a connector. Is like, we played outside as kids and we didn't think about that as a responsible, engaging political act. It was just instinct.
What we did. Yeah.
And then there's this thing in the theater where like you're playing, you're make-believing, like even as an audience. Like one of my favorite things as a designer, and this is what I miss working in film right now, is like I design shows so I can watch the audience watch the show. Like that's legit why I do it. And there's this thing that happens to everyone of every age at some point when we're doing our work where they're just like a kid again.
Yeah.
And they just can't help themselves. Yeah. And that I think there's like this, like we feel overburdened by responsibility.
Yeah.
So how do we remind people of the play and the joy and the I can't help but care feeling that comes from those experiences?
Yeah.
Because you've gotten out of yourself and you're just part of the world and you're engaging with the people in the world and the creatures of the world. Like it sounds really, light, but I think there's something there. There's something between those two, sustainability and theater. Like they're connected by play.
100%. I really agree with you, Alexandra. You know, when we lose touch with nature, we lose touch with that playfulness and that joy, and then our lives become heavy and serious. And then we add in built-in environments, you know, sedentary lifestyles, and you get anxiety and mental health issues across the globe. Right. So there, again, the intersection of mental health for artists and for our audiences, there's magic to be experienced when we're sitting in the lap of nature, and that's beautiful to reconnect to that. And that's what I meant by relationship. I mean, consciously exploring that again and igniting that again.
Yeah. So it's not contrary in that it's like the
it's not
opposite.
contrary at all.
I think it's like the other side of that, you know, with that freedom and that play and that joy comes this like insatiable desire to care and protect and like, you know, value, I think.
It's like what David Attenborough says, right? You can't care about what you do. You can't protect what you don't care about, and you can't care about what you don't experience. Right. And we've lost that experience. A lot of us. I mean, I speak generally when I say we, obviously, but you know, so yeah, how do we bring that experience back to people?
I have a thought that's maybe like a similarly left field because you inspired me, Alex. But building off the points that have been made before, like one way that maybe we can disentangle this problem is doing something completely differently, or challenging all the assumptions underpinning what we think theater even is. You know, I think you tapped into the fact that we're assuming that like theater is like we're in this black box. You know, we're gonna have a tech week. There's gonna be fixed seating, and also the questions about what the story is even being told. Like on the artist creator front, is the story restricted to that 90 minutes, or is it about that time that you were a kid? You know. Out in space and really finding an appreciation and a wonder, you know, and just and then in the way that we work, just like smashing those. I think the hierarchy within our working spaces. You know, this is a difficult realization I've come to recently, which is maybe a controversial one. I think, my hot take. I think a majority of our workplaces in this country as theaters are toxic in one way or another. And they're so hierarchical. The power hoarding is like so real. Totally. We need to empower the folks that are energized about these problems in our institutions. Absolutely. If they're stuck in their strata within the hierarchy, these institutions won't change. So maybe the artistic director, the executive director doesn't have on the ground, you know, excitement about it, but don't restrict the employee that is incredibly passionate and can you know, snowball this thing into something that's meaningful in your organization. And I think every organization needs to be future forecasting in this way. It's a liability for any theater to be irresponsible with the climate, I think, in this next decade. So let's see everybody take up that mantle. One thing
that I love that was mentioned, and forgive me, it may have been Harveen, but we've had so many wonderful things that I'm losing track. But one thing that was mentioned was like, the benefit that this can have on our communities when we adopt this kind of work. And by our communities, I mean our community as arts workers, but also like the community that exists surrounding theaters as institutions. So like if your theater is in Stratford, for instance, like the community that surrounds your theater, businesses, patrons, you know, school children. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we can leverage this kind of work to help us actually branch back out from our arts organizations to not only connect with our communities, but possibly even invite more communities in, communities that have been left out of the conversation, ignored, you know, not let into this sphere. I'm curious as to your thoughts as how that might work.
There's so much there. Like the first thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, because we're talking about the environmental crisis and climate change, this concerns everyone. So all of a sudden, because theater has a propensity still to this day, at least in Canada, to kind of exist in a silo. We're disconnected from other sectors of society, actually, bizarrely. So as soon as we get into this conversation, then it goes, well, hold on, we're all affected. And I think what it has the power to do, because it's all about dialogue, is it has the power to do something that it's what David Diamond talks about. He's a wonderful theater artist and theater maker from the West Coast. He talks about, we need to move from making theater for communities to making theater with communities and telling the community story. So how do we do that? One thing, that I know, Alexandra, you and I have talked about this in one of our meetings, is so simple but so fundamental. Starting in theater school, theater schools are so disconnected from the rest of the universities or schools that they're part of. How is it that we are not collaborating with the engineering department, the architecture department, the fashion department, the social science department, the food department? How are we so completely siloed in, and then we emerge in society in that same bubble?
Absolutely.
That's the thing.
Absolutely.
So it's disconnected the whole way down to the root, is what I would say.
Yeah.
So this is, when we talk about dialogue and we start engaging audience members and getting them to go, throwing it back at them and going, join us on this journey. What can you tell us? What do you want to see? What stories do you want to hear? It can change the landscape of theater, which Kevin was talking about earlier, and the content that we create and the processes of creation. Do we look to one artistic director to create a program? Can we really go forward into this century with that model of one person deciding a season, and then marketing the season and trying to convince everyone that this is what you need to come and see, this is what you should want to see? Or do we do we work in dialogue? And it's connected to, it's all about opening up all these doors, I think.
Yeah. That brings to mind, go ahead, Aisha.
No, you go first.
I was just going to say, that brings to mind, like, when theaters really started to, be dragged into this conversation that they definitely weren't ready to be having, about all the stuff that we've started talking about through 2020 and 2021. Much of the conversation was around audience reach out and community reach out and how difficult that was for theaters. And it struck me as funny as an environmentalist, because I was like, there's so many elements to, like, climate conscious theater that does that work for you immediately, and Aisha, I know we've talked about this as Aisha's the head of our food and drink at the Canadian Green Alliance, and we've talked a lot about how, like, why are we walking into a lobby and seeing Nestle? Why are we walking into a lobby and seeing Coke? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we have community businesses that we could be drawing in, and then of course their community comes to the theater because they're proud of their community involvement. And so there's so many problems that have solutions within climate, conscious theater. Go ahead, Aisha.
That's what I was going to kind of segue to. And like, this is maybe like a little bit of like shameless promotion for myself. But like, so a lot of my work as an artist and as a scholar is I'm looking at the intersections between cooking and performance. And, I created, and Alex had the joy of kind of witnessing it in the very early stages of my development of this performance installation that I created, which is really, it's called Movements with My Ancestors. And I'm essentially preparing a meal. And it has moved from like working within a space and like really moving it back to the land. I'm saying back to, because that's where I think that's where the food comes from, if we're looking at that whole like circular process. But I think, when I think of food, food, every time I've done this installation, it's a nonverbal installation. I don't talk throughout this process, right? But I don't have to, because the audience just does it for me. Like, everybody just goes into this beautiful dialogue and the different experiences with food, whether it's something that they're sharing that they've had, or something that they've witnessed, or whatever it may be. And I think food to me is like always the core. Like, I think that's like the answer to everything, is like, go back to the food. If you bring good food somewhere, no matter what, people will come. I'm telling you, right? It's just facts, right? You bring food to a meeting and it's good food, people are going to have a great meeting, right? And so I just think about, like, as we've talked about it, Julia, like, if you're going to go to the theater, you can't wait to see the show, to top it off with having great food there. Oh, come on. Like, I think it's just so important, and it also gives you, like you said, it gives opportunity for people to engage with different types of culture, different types of food. This is a huge opportunity space. And I think
That's
we spent a long time like not utilizing that area as an opportunity to really connect with communities. And we need to, like, moving forward, that just needs to be what it is. Like, no more like, oh, we need prepackaged things. It needs to be easy. This is so frustrating to me. Everybody just wants ease all the time, which I understand, because life is really hectic and busy, but it's also just a perception, right? Like, I think it always comes down to perception. And like, I wrote something down. We're afraid. I just think that constantly wanting to move from a place of ease, you're negating or the actual experience that you can have with something. You know what I mean? There's so much information and opportunity within having really great food. I'm going off topic now. Sorry. Yes.
No. Beautifully.
That's amazing. Like, can you imagine, going to a theater? Like, that's the thing, is the theater is an amazing place because you've got people, hundreds of people coming to the same place every night. Why aren't we making more? That thing that you're talking about, Aisha, of what if we featured, local restaurants that are providing organic local food and getting audiences in on that conversation about farming and agriculture. All of a sudden you've connected. They've come to see a show, but then they also take away this amazing experience and connection to a whole other part of, living and life that concerns them, actually.
Right. And exposes them, like you said, like to farming, to maybe they didn't even know that there was like a farm that was like, I don't know, just down the street, and now there's like a little booth with that local farm is like sharing this whatever they have, then there's like, oh crap, like I didn't even know that was a thing before, and I think that 100%. It's those moments that I think we now more than ever we need to capitalize on. So much.
And what a missed opportunity to tell a story from the moment your audience enters your building compared to the moment the audience enters their theater, right? Like we're letting valuable storytelling real estate just go for ease and for convenience, which is really tough to see. Anyone else want to weigh in on this topic?
I guess like I'm curious, I'll just bring in a design lens. Like I'm super curious how I can have an even deeper engagement with storytelling through art objects that I might be creating, and how my relationship with the raw materials and the multiple lives of art objects can also be like a narrative that audiences can take away. So I dream, similarly to some of you, I think, of like, what if designers got to program a season where we were like talking to each other like over a whole season? Like maybe we don't program it, but we're in conversation and we're working with the producers, we're working with the programming, we're working with everything to share materials amongst shows. And actually, like, I dream not only of sharing materials, but like, what if we're creating an art object that is changing over the course of a season, and like audiences are coming to see these stories, like all these different stories that are being told, but they're like in engagement with material that's like changing and modifying for each story, and they're understanding through observing that like you can engage with materials in multiple ways before you discard them. Like there's so many ways that you can think of narrative in this engagement with food and community, with the act of storytelling through theater, and then the objects and materials that you're using to tell those stories. I think that we are missing opportunities to create new relationships with objects, materials, food, and each other. And all of those things happen in theater spaces. And I think that we can, through example, like we do, like designers do this all the time. We're doing it behind closed doors. Like, why aren't we showing more people that we know how to do this? Like, we know how to look at a garment and imagine it in 5 other ways. Like, that's a skill that people are going to need more and more in the future. Absolutely. And I think we need to see theater skills as life skills, and that we need to also uncover or like take out of the wings like these ways that we're already really sustainable in our art and our practice. And we need to bring that out front for the people to see. So it's not just about reducing our carbon footprint. It's also about bringing like skills to the forefront, because sustainability is also about skill sharing and skill building. So I dream of theater of being gathering spaces for skills and resources, and like I can teach you how to keep those clothes going for much longer than you know how right now. Like just because of my art practice.
Exactly.
So
that's so amazing, because that's the thing. Sustainability requires creativity, and the theater has creativity in spades. Like, yeah, that's wonderful.
Kevin, do you want to weigh in before?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really exciting points about the possibilities of transferable skills, Alex. I'm thinking about also where my mind was going was the time poor thought, and how sometimes, like, as a freelancer, feeling time poor to not, ask to learn about other disciplines. Like, maybe that's a way that we can also think about the way that we structure our time as theater organizations, as individuals, to share that knowledge, and the story that's being told there about how many transferable skills we all have, and how we can all benefit from learning within the artistic community. And just that on the question of community, I think that time poor framing is just really a huge impediment to anything community. I think a lot of the time when we hear the word outreach in theater, what we actually mean is get people that look a certain way or do certain things to buy tickets, rather than let's learn from folks that do those things or are from those communities. It really needs us to get out of this place of, we're really time poor, and we need to be thinking about time as a resource consciously and budgeting for that in the same way that we're serious about dollars, and those relationships as a resource, not as something that's like quantifiable, but that is feelable. Measurable in terms of feeling, maybe.
Amazing. Hold on to that thought about budgeting for time, because we're coming back to a producing conversation in a second. But I love to, it's interesting to me to sort of get granular with some of our departments and some of the barriers in those departments with people who are in and outside of those departments, because I always think that's such an interesting way to engage in something. For instance, I always have a really interesting conversation at the CGA with something that I know nothing about, and me and the person we're chatting with both come out with like new ideas and new brainstorms, just because there's different perspectives in the conversation. That being said, I love to go granular and talk a bit about design, theater design. Alex, obviously you're a designer, so I'm going to put this to you first, but please let's all weigh in on this as well. What are your most treasured goals for theater design, sustainable design, and what barriers do you see us facing right now to achieving some of those innovations?
I mean, I've said it before. I think the only barrier is imagination or lack thereof. I really think that, we get stuck in our ways in theater sometimes. That happens more than it should. So like we have like a very standardized process right now for design that makes it hard to imagine, like I said before, sharing resources, which would really excite me, between productions. There's something that happens in how a show is scheduled that like there just isn't enough time between two designers working on two different shows to be able to share. They're just so close. They're just too close together, but like not far, like it's just the timing's a little off. So I think we need to think a little bit further in advance about structuring our seasons differently to facilitate more resource sharing and more material sharing. I think that is a collaboration that can happen across departments if that's a priority for everyone, which I think is a key piece in any institutional change, is that it has to be a priority from the institution just as much as it is from the individual, and they need to be in relationship with each other. So we're not going to be able to come blazing in with all these big ideas and expect for it to be the right fit. It's always going to have to be in dialogue and in conversation with how the structure is working. I guess I dream as a designer of being able to be in conversation with producers from the beginning, so we can be using our creative brains to help save time, money, and resources, because I truly believe if we're doing that from the beginning, we can do that. Like we can bring our skills to the table. So I'd love that. I also dream, like, I know the biggest barrier to sustainability in design, a lot of people will say, is storage space, because of the assumption that we should be keeping things so we can reuse them. But I would like to rise to the challenge of, like, how can we do it without taking up physical space? And so I think that is like restructuring how we think about renting props pieces, costume pieces, and set pieces. So I would love to imagine a future where we have rental houses, or they might be called something else, like more of like a library perhaps, where you take something and you can't return it in the way it was when you took it away. Like the engagement with the materials and the art objects is that you have to transform them. You have to add your creativity and your touch to all of these things so that they never have the same like impact on an audience. They're always a new object, and we use them until they can't be used anymore. Yeah. And like, so they're not sitting collecting dust and costing companies money. So I'd love to imagine that being something that's shared between theater companies, and that theater companies don't feel the need to store things for that remount that they're never going to have. So yeah, I just would love, you know, to engage with things while they still have a life ahead of them and before they've collected dust and started falling apart. So I think there's a lot of ways, if we could think about doing our work differently every time, we can always get better. And sometimes we're limited by these strict ways of working that don't leave a lot of space for trying new things.
So well said.
Alex, you're reminding me of a really, actually, as an audience member, a really pleasurable moment in a live stream recently. So in Samson Bunky Buntu Brown's 1111, there are a couple rocks that I noticed that I'm pretty sure are from Yolanda Bonnell's Bug.
I love
the relationship between the themes and just like making that connection was so interesting. And I just thought, this is also left field idea, but you know how there's like actor credits, you know, like Julia McLellan's appeared in, like, and then all the this lamp has appeared in, you know,
I love
so
that.
fun. This rock has appeared in.
Triga did that. So
really?
One of Triga's designers, Shannon, she talked to another designer, I think it was Joanna maybe, who had designed trees for a show at another theater company. And she said, are you comfortable with me using those shows for production I'm doing at Native Earth? I'll give you a credit in the program for the original design of the trees.
Wow, good.
Wow, cool.
And then they did that. And like, she got these trees for free, created no new waste, and like gave more publicity to another amazing artist. So like,
that's really cool.
I think that it's
cool.
We don't need to own things.
Right.
We don't need to, we need to share, you know?
Definitely this idea of possession too. Like I think about all of the stuff that we as humans collect. Like we just love stuff so much. Like, and it's like this, that makes me think about this idea around possession and like ownership and, you know, mine. And this is like, you know, and I'm curious around how maybe that idea or that concept, how we need to kind of readjust that as well, so that when we are looking at things, we're like, this is ours. You know, how can we share this? How can we, you know, as you said, Alex, like how can we recreate it? I love the ideas of these rental houses. I think that's so freaking brilliant.
And then it does become more of a library, because it's like, this was touched by this artist, this artist, this artist, this artist. And it's like a celebration of community and like collective art making.
So wow, what a richer history we start to develop there as a community and as an industry, right? Like there's so much magic wrapped up in that idea that is so cool. But I think it touches for me on something that's come up in a lot of meetings with designers, is the idea that one of the barriers to sustainability is like intellectual property in a way.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that like, well, what if I design this gorgeous door, it ends up in somebody else's production and they win a Dora? You know, how does that?
Adora.
How does that work? Adora.
Hilarious. Well, I think that we have to talk to each other more because I don't know, like there's a company in Quebec that is reselling like used set pieces, and they do have standardized contracts, which is like I consent that this be used, and it's up to the original designer to determine whether they're comfortable with their intellectual property being reused in a way that they know they can't control. So I think that there's a way to operate within that intellectual property system that is respectful. But there's a lot of designers that are like, please, like, use it. Yeah. So I think giving people the option is great and important, but I think it's also cool to see how many people are just like, make art. Like, I want more people to share in that magic. So but yeah, definitely we have to be aware of intellectual property for sure.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'd love to like double back on to move us forward to our next question. But what I really love is that someone mentioned, I think, Alex, it was you talking about sort of like the timing is off in between productions in order to facilitate collaboration and facilitate there being like a handing of the baton to the next production in a way that's like really productive for sustainability. And it occurs to me too that there is sort of this like disposable element to the theater we're creating right now, not only just with sets and design, but also with the mental health of the arts workers involved. I don't know about you, but I've been in productions where it just ends like you've poured your heart out into a design or into a performance, and then all of a sudden the next day you're on the TTC, like you're in a Ninja Turtles costume for $200 that day, and you're like, wow, my life has changed very quickly. So I wonder if there's like not some sort of connection between, you know, mental health of arts workers and sustainability linking in together in this process of like a more ceremonial handing of the baton, a more, you know, mindful way of progressing through shows. And that leads me to a production question. So I'm going to direct this towards Kevin first, but then we'll all weigh in. What are the barriers for producers in figuring out ways to facilitate this kind of time management that seems really counterintuitive to the way we make theater now?
Well, I think it's I'll start by saying one thing that I've really I'm grateful for from the pandemic is being forced to consider what's the why of all of the projects that I'm working on, because they've all had to be pushed. They've had COVID adaptations, and without grounding that project in the why, it was just assumed before. Any decision is almost impossible or arbitrary, and I think I'm reflecting upon that responsibility for a producer, in that for a company, sometimes that person is one of the only folks that goes from project to project to project. And to ground that institution, to ground that entity in a strong why, with relationship to artist health, for example, with a relationship to racial justice, with a relationship to climate justice, that actually I think is a really important role of a producer, setting the stage for the collaboration, or how it begins, how it takes place, and how it ends. So I think that is maybe a mental block, I would say. And one other mind trick that I think we have to play as producers is just to get out of a scarcity mindset. Yes. Even if resources are scarce, we have to think about these resources creatively, and we have to be certain about what we're willing to prioritize and what we are willing to let go of.
Yeah.
And again, that I think those are arbitrary decisions unless you have a strong why, and a why in every single decision. And so maybe I'll just go to really popcorn style, some things that producers may want to think about. Budgeting world, easy ones are you think about offsets? That's like maybe one of the easiest things that you can do, because it's just numbers in a budget and it's just one transaction at the end of the show. So if you're time poor, that should be the one that you go for right away.
Kevin, can you just quickly explain what an offset is?
Yeah, so a carbon offset is aiming to make all of the carbon emissions that you've created in your process of your show, whether it's in the creation of sets, props, and costumes, or it's in transport, or it's in the energy of the building. They don't disappear, but you're trying to make them neutral through essentially investing into things that take carbon out of the atmosphere. So that is something that you can do, and there are sites that offer this service. And if you have some funds, it's probably less expensive than you think. And also it's way faster than you think. And you should consider doing that. Also, in terms of budgeting, you could budget for consultants on all of these. A producer shouldn't feel that they have to have all the answers. We need to rely upon one another, and that's an additional opportunity to employ artists in our community.
Yes.
So think about consultants in your process, whether that's cultural consultants or whether that's environmental considerations. Of course, other ones could be transport. I think this is the NAC or it's somebody in Toronto. I'm sorry, whoever's idea this was, but they have a rail corridor that there's no, maybe it's Auto. Okay, sorry, all of y'all, depending on whoever it is. They don't fly folks around this rail corridor. I believe it's the Quebec City, Toronto rail corridor. It's only rail. Even if it's tight, you're going on a train. So those are things that producers can decide to do. And then timelines, we've been using the term time poor a lot. But it's really important that we think about longer timelines than just a season or production team. Because it cannot happen for your company that you're going to change all of your policies. For example, if you think about access, you're not going to become completely accessible to any disability community tomorrow by doing one show. And you won't understand all the nuance. So you have to invest in what that research timeline will be. Who's accountable for that process? How does that slowly, not immediately into everything, but slowly and with purpose seep into all elements of production? Just to make sure that you're doing it mindfully. And one thing that I'm just reminded, Alex reminded me of through Ian's contribution to this conversation, for producers, is that a full house isn't just about butts and seats. It's about actually sharing the energy resources of that building. So you might as well think about producers.
On that note, I'm just reading something in the chat. Oh God, I think I lost it. I think it's Michael Cox who's joining in and saying, imagine there was no, that's not what it is. Where is it? Yeah, he's exactly saying that. He's going, imagine if it wasn't just about filling theaters at night. It's a space. It's a huge space with resources and energy. And it's, what if we used it during the day for community, for other things? That made me think of that. That's,
I would also like to point out that is my husband. And when I was asking him for ideas earlier, he did not come forward with that bang of a question. Where are you asking your questions?
Thanks a lot, husband.
Well, he's pretty active on the chat right now. So,
so let's actually transition. If does anyone else want to weigh in on this producing question? Any ideas, brainstorm, messages to our producers in our industry that you'd like to convey? Or we're good to move on. Awesome. So we've got some audience questions that I'd love to dive into because they're great questions. And if I don't get to all of them, I'm terribly sorry. But please feel free. Also, this live stream is going to exist on our YouTube forever. So you can also leave comments there for us, and we'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can. So the first audience question is, how do we hold theaters accountable with the needed change to sustainable theater? And this is a great question, and one that really comes up in our board meetings a ton at the CGA, because we're trying to really get to the bottom of, like, in a world where we're like consumed by this sort of like cancel culture thing going on right now, how do we keep theaters accountable without making it feel like we are policing or it's something that is negative? How do we maintain accountability in a positive and encouraging light?
I think that's a great question. I think that a really good thing to do is assess values within the company. So I think that you need to start by not assuming that everybody has the same relationship with sustainability. And you need to get everybody involved who works for the company, whether they're full-time employees and more administrative to your freelance artists who come and go and interact with other companies. And I think you need to start talking about shared values. And once you can commit to like a foundational shared value of what is measuring success and sustainability, you're going to be able to achieve those goals. Because I think it can feel like a big mountain to climb, and you need to be allies and not be policing each other. So you need to like agree on steps you're going to take, because any step's a good step. And then you need to positively reinforce each other. and you need to definitely make sure that you're hiring experts and getting training, and just, yeah, like the most successful experience I've had with holding a company accountable to sustainability is currently in film. I'm working on a production that is committed to being as green as possible in every aspect of their production. And in order to hold everybody accountable in the production in a good way, there's an expert on staff who's an environmentalist. She's not an artist, and she is literally there to answer anyone's question when they have it. Wow. And it is so much easier to be involved in making good choices, better choices, when you can feel like it's okay to ask a question, it's okay to not know. So I don't know. I think that what I said earlier about it being the institution and the individual constantly in relationship with each other and holding each other accountable is key. And you have a lot of individuals in theater companies that need to establish shared values before you can embark on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, like when I went to school, and this is just an example, I think, with what you're saying, Alex, is just like when I went to school, I did a program in Berlin, and the space that we were using was completely, there was a garbage in one spot in the building, and it was a constant reminder. And the one spot that it was in the building, it was like it was on the way out. Like it wasn't like by the studios. Of course there's a garbage in the washroom, but like other than that, it was like you were constantly engaging with like, oh, like this is the waste I'm bringing in every single day. Because you were forced to think about it. You were forced to be like, oh, right, like I can't just have this bag and like put in the garbage. I actually have to take it with me. And so like I think there's something about that practice that really kind of was one of the seeds that I was like, oh wow, I just love how much I had to really think about that constantly as somebody who was in this space every single day, as somebody who's visiting this space all the time. It also reminded me too, this is hilarious. For me, it's funny. But like when I was at all those years ago, when I was maybe like, I don't know, 10 or 11, I had gone to Disney World, and there was no gum on like in the entire place. Like you couldn't buy gum because they were just like, people, what they do though, when they're done eating the gum, they'll just spit it on the ground, and it caused all this havoc on the way that it looked, right? So they're like, yeah, we don't sell gum here. At least I don't know if it's like that now, but when I was there, that was such a moment of like, I was in shock because as a kid, I loved gum. So I was like, what? I can't get gum? But now looking back at that, I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. So I think for me, it's about these theater companies and institutions really really laying down specific structures that people have to walk into and be like, that really interrogates their own relationship to it. Like, oh shoot, like I can't do that. So something to think about.
Yeah. One of the things that I offer companies in my other parallel career, I'm an environmental consultant for businesses. And one of the things I offer to them as like an exercise is take away your trash can for a week and force yourself to carry your garbage home with you at the end of every night. Because I think what we lose when we have convenience and like availability to improper waste management is we lose that intimate relationship with our actual waste, like what we produce as an individual. And so a lot of times when people ask me like, you know, like most 70% of the waste, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions, like since 98 can be linked to like 25 companies. What can I as an individual do? I always say, well, like, look, start with your individual footprint and like get an intimate relationship with how you actually affect the land, affect the environment. And that's going to be a gateway for you to create larger advocacy. But until you have like a real personal relationship with your footprint, it becomes really hard for us to imagine what the collective footprint might be moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense, right? Because the collective footprint is just the individual footprint multiplied by X, right? Like it sounds so obvious, but it's like if you wrap your head around what you're creating, then you understand immediately what's happening on a larger scale.
Yeah. I wanted to also like offer too that In terms of accountability, we think about this a lot at the CGA because it's going to be part of our model. Like there's going to be a certification model for theaters working through this program. And how do we implement accountability that doesn't feel so rotten and policey and sort of like negative? And one of the things that we're trying to toy around with is how do we create like a inside the theater community net of accountability so that it feels very much like cheerleading. It feels very much like a team effort. Because we also have to think, like, I love what I think Alex said earlier about how like success and sustainability doesn't look the same for everybody, given their privileges, given their budgets, given their geography. You know, we've all got these like privileges here in Toronto. We've got a ton of privilege here. We've got municipal programs. We've got all sorts of things that help us be more green. But I'm from a tiny rural place in Nova Scotia. So if I'm working at like, you know, a smaller place without municipal composting, without recycling, what have you, my privileges aren't as large in terms of like that being an easy process for me. So I think in terms of accountability, we have to really like make it more of a holistic thing about celebration as opposed to negativity, because this month we did this great thing. Like, even though we've got these barriers, let's celebrate that to invigorate ourselves to move forward and be more positive and want to do more.
I think like the biggest thing that I remind myself when I'm trying to be more sustainable is that the systems around us are not set up for our success. So every small thing that we achieve in attempting to do better is huge.
Massive.
So an institution committing to one thing as a collective that is going to be different than what they did last year is beneficial. It's huge. So any effort made is success, and you have to define that for yourself, because otherwise it feels like a huge thing to tackle, and then you feel time poor. But just bite off what you can chew.
Yeah, absolutely. No, go ahead, Harvey.
One thing I was going to say really quickly about that, how do we rally in a celebratory way? I mean, that's kind of what the education department at the Canadian Green Alliance is about, is creating a network across the country of artists who are plugged into these issues, by providing them opportunities to educate themselves, so that what you get in rehearsal halls is a diverse group of people, one or two or three of whom might be a green deputy who's done some of our training, and they can gently work with the company that they're doing a show with to provide guidance, to provide ideas, so that the onus is not entirely on the company itself to do the research, to do the legwork, right? So that they're drawing on the knowledge of the people they hire. So that's a big part of the work we want to do, is create a network of people who can provide that guidance and that cheerleading, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to move on to the next question from our audience. Curious how you foresee the relationship between virtual theater and technology in theater more generally, and sustainability. And this is a really interesting one. We get questions about this all the time. I would love to know your thoughts if you've looked into this intersection between a digital footprint and our theatrical process. Kevin, do you have thoughts? I feel like you may have thoughts.
Not fully formed ones. Definitely not fully formed ones. In terms of that transport point that Alex brought up, I think that's definitely a big benefit. And of course, audience access is a huge benefit of virtual theater, and exposure to different ideas, like especially if they're climate engaged ideas across like a larger network of folks. There are also businesses. There's one in Canada called Bullfrog Power, and you could engage them to green your virtual theater show. So what they would do is you would pay for however many audience members viewed your stream, and then they would offset that performance for the entire, basically the average amount of emissions from electricity usage in one apartment or one house for the entire day. So you could do it that way too. The amount of emissions per for like an hour of laptop usage isn't actually ginormous. So like I think if you offset like a month in a full house, that might cover your your digital emissions. Of course, it is hard to have a precise, and I think that does need an expert in terms of like where the show is hosted, like how folks are tuning in, what the grid is like, where folks are tuning in from. So it's quite actually complex. But if you did want to try to start chipping away at that impact, it is doable and quantifiable because you have viewership numbers.
Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in? No,
I don't know enough about the technology side, but I would say that I am curious personally about how people feel they can engage in environment through virtual space versus being in a theater space. So I guess I know that Ian Garrett once again has done a lot of work with his company Toaster Lab. So if you are interested in looking into their work, what they're doing is they're using apps on phones to get people to engage in physical environmental spaces that aren't in theaters. So like walking outside and learning about the land and the people who lived there and work there and, the histories of land through technology that's getting you outside, engaging with environment and storytelling. So I would say Ian Garrett's a huge resource for technology and sustainability in theater, whereas my practice is more material and set and costume. But yeah, his work with Toaster Lab would be interesting to look into, and he's always open to questions.
And we're also going to have a panel called Is Virtual Sustainable? So we're going to be diving into a full panel. So that's really exciting. Good. So stay tuned for that. One thing that occurs to me too, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that actually Serena, who you heard her music at the top of the show today, who's also on our board, she hosts an amazing, revolutionary dance party online. It's called Club Q. And what started as a thing that was in response to not being able to go out and find queer-friendly spaces during the pandemic and for mental health, it's also blossomed into this really wonderful thing for the disabled community, because those are opportunities that for some people are not accessible. And so I'm really interested in the conversation about how virtual theater can make theater more accessible for more folks, whether it be, our disabled community or communities in really remote regions that don't have access to a lot of arts and culture in an organizational sense, of course. I'm interested in knowing your thoughts on that. Or you can also just say, next question.
I think we're moving a bit out of my personal forte, but I guess accessibility to good Wi-Fi is a big question outside of city centers in Canada. So I think that if we're going to be expanding into more virtual theater practice, I think we're going to have to be aware of accessibility to the technology and the streaming capabilities that are needed just as much as people being able to buy tickets and get to a theater in person. So I think it's a good moment to talk about how sustainability isn't just about environmental impact, but it's about economic restrictions and limitations and access. So that's my one piece, just because I'm not technological, but I'm aware of access to technology.
For sure. Moving forward, we've got another audience question that says, on the design side, I'm interested how you view lighting, sound, tech design, and how we can design shows that use more natural forms of theatrical tech.
Oh, that's a great question. I know that there are certain theater companies that have thought about using solar panels during the day to actually power their lights at night, since most shows happen in the evening. So there is a lot of architects that are working in designing theatrical spaces that are more intrinsically connected to the environment. So my work as a designer is inside the physical space primarily, so it's not my place of expertise, but I will redirect to the Prague Quadrennial, which has great publications that you can access through their website. And in their last event, they spoke a lot about the future of designing these gathering spaces where we create theater. And there's a lot of worldwide architects that are trying to bring sustainable building practices into the design of buildings to offset the carbon footprint of creating a production. So yeah, the one that I was most interested in when I visited the exhibit was a theater who was doing solar paneling during the day that would fuel their production throughout the night.
Wow.
And then there's also like a whole practice of outdoor site-specific environmental theater where, you know, you're not in a physical space, you're not really using power, and like that's, you know, has its own impact on the environment to be concerned with, which, yeah, it's like a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to weigh in on this one? Give you a chance to read it. Anybody? No? We can move on. Yes. Okay. Let's
actually, I will say something.
Yeah.
It took me forever to think about it. There's a couple of, well, there's more than a couple. I mean, there's so much outdoor theater in Canada.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing because it puts people on land. Like it's not a built-in space. You know, there's this company out east. I don't remember their name, but they only use natural theater processes. Like they don't use any tech. Like as soon as tech comes into the picture, they're like, oh, can't do it. And you know, it's immersive outdoor theater, and you're in the environment, you're in the spaces, you're near a forest, let's say, and it's all lit with candles and with lanterns, and obviously this is limited because you can't do this year round. You can't do that in -30. Right? It's a seasonal thing, but taking more advantage, I guess, of that, and seeing outdoor theater not as a challenge necessarily, but as an opportunity for really, really magical possibility, and a really wonderful design. I guess a design challenge, but more so as something that's really potentially quite magical, that we can't even replicate indoors in the theater.
Yeah.
Because nature's alive, right? That's the thing. It's like it's a character unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
With that amazing image, just like so concreted in my heart and brain from now on. Thanks, Harveen. We have come to the end of our panel. We've run out of time. I feel like we could all talk for about 19 hours about all of these like wonderful intersections within this conversation. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to our amazing panelists. We have Harveen Sandhu, Alexandra Lord, Aisha Lesley Bentham, and Kevin Matthew Wong. Thank you all so much for being with us. You're incredible. Your brains are mind palaces. And I just also want to say that, remind everyone that these panels are produced in partnership with TAPA and our amazing Singular Sensation, who built this entire thing and are running it behind the scenes. So Jenny and Stefan, you are amazing. Thank you so much. And please join us next month. Keep an eye on our Instagram for the topic we're headed to next month. It's got a bit of a surprise. So please keep your eyes on our Instagram, and we're going to be back here in a month's time talking about more climate conscious theater. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.